Let's get you to NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba, NBC's Melanie Zanona on Capitol Hill, NBC Justice reporter Ryan Riley is also in Washington, and then here in New York, MSNBC legal analyst and former Assistant Manhattan District Attorney Catherine Christian. Melanie, tell us about this move from Senator Schumer, and will it work?
Well, there are a lot of questions right now about whether there is any enforcement mechanism for Democrats, given they are in the minority, but they are using this rarely used law in order to at least request the Epstein files. That law states that an executive agency, on the request of the Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs of the Senate, or any 5 members thereof, shall submit any information requested of it relating to any matter within the jurisdiction of the committee. And in this letter to Attorney General Pam Bondi, they request all the files, material, any documents related to the Epstein case, but they also implore the agency to take all necessary steps to protect any identifiable information about the victims, as well as removing any materials that depict child sexual abuse. And that was one of the concerns that the administration has cited as a reason why it has yet to release those files. So just another prime example here of how Democrats are trying to capitalize on an issue that has divided the GOP and really trying to keep the heat on President Donald Trump.
And so, Monica, we know the White House has restricted who can discuss Epstein with reporters, but the president has continued to field questions on this day after day, and each time he seems to give new details or raise even more questions. Walk us through this Air Force One exchange and his comments regarding Virginia Giuffre, that crucial Epstein accuser.
Yeah, Anna, over the last couple of days while he was traveling in Scotland, the president was the one introducing some new information, trying to give sort of an evolving explanation of what caused a falling out between him and Jeffrey Epstein all those years ago. And yesterday, he provided some new details for the first time, saying that it was a couple of employees at his Mar-a-Lago facility, specifically at the spa, that Jeffrey Epstein tried to hire away from him, including Virginia Giuffre, who, of course, was a very prominent and outspoken survivor of Jeffrey Epstein's abuse. And we know from just those details that the president provided that he claims he told Jeffrey Epstein to stop it, and that when he did it again, he told him, quote, get out of here. So this was something where the president was willing to share more details that, to your point, is only going to raise more questions like, did he say something to anybody at the time? Was he concerned about that? Why did he think Jeffrey Epstein was trying to hire these younger women away from his property? And where did that ultimately lead to? And then the falling out that's been reported elsewhere is something that maybe took place a couple of years later over a potential real estate deal. The White House had said he kicked him out of Mar-a-Lago because he was, quote, a creep. So where does that all line up in the timeline? That's something that now the White House is likely going to face even more questions on as they're trying to change the subject to other topics. Anna.
Catherine, Virginia Giuffre, sadly, is no longer with us. She took her own life, but she had said that she was recruited by Maxwell at Mar-a-Lago. She told investigators, this was in 2000, she was a teenager at the time, that Maxwell lured her and introduced her ultimately to Jeffrey Epstein and facilitated this abuse with him and with other people, she had said. So President Trump, for the first time, is now confirming at least part of her story about being recruited from Mar-a-Lago specifically. At this point, how important is it to get the full understanding of President Trump's knowledge at the time that this was happening?
Well, you said it exactly. President Trump just corroborated her, and may she rest in peace. Corroborated her when she says, that's where I met Epstein, Mar-a-Lago. So that's very important. And the follow-up questions that I would have if I were cross-examining or even asking direct questions of the president, you said, or your spokesperson said, he was a creep. What made him a creep? What did he do that you found creepy? How many of these people you say he took, he refers to them as people, were women? Not just women, under age 18, which means they weren't women. They were girls. Why were you so concerned? Did you have any concern? So those are the follow-up questions. Did he see President Trump? Oh, he's taking all the teen girls. He's a creep because X, Y, and Z. He hasn't articulated that, but he hasn't been asked those direct questions. Now that he's confirmed Ms. Giuffre, maybe it's time to, if he wants to, answer the questions, ask him some more direct questions.
Yeah, in fact, it took him a while to even and eventually get to that Virginia Giuffre answer. I want to play that part of this Q&A specifically. Let's listen.
Mr. President, did one of those stolen, persons, does that include Virginia Giuffre?
I don't know. I think she worked at the spa. I think so. I think that was one of the people. Yeah. He stole her. And by the way, she had no complaints about us, as you know. None whatsoever.
So this does open a bigger can of worms, so to speak. Monica, despite Giuffre's accusations and the 4 accusers who testified in trial that Maxwell groomed and abused them, despite Maxwell's conviction for sexually exploiting and abusing underage girls, President Trump still hasn't ruled out a pardon for her. Do we know if anyone is advising him on this specific issue?
Yeah, and in fact, when he is asked about the potential for a pardon, he says, well, I'm allowed to do it, trying to assert the fact that if he wanted to exercise that presidential power, he could offer and extend some clemency. But he has also said that it's not the appropriate time to talk about it. And remember that that's some of the language that the Department of Justice has used when it's talked about the meetings between the Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche and Ghislaine Maxwell, saying that they would reveal more information, quote, at an appropriate time. So that's the other thing we're trying to follow here about what that means and whether, depending on what other information she did provide in that, there could be any conversation about a potential pardon or some clemency that is granted by the president. In terms of who's advising him, we're not really sure, and this is something that obviously is ultimately up to the president, but you have to imagine that Todd Blanche, because he was his close personal attorney in those criminal trials in the past, is somebody perhaps that he could be discussing that matter with. We're not sure if that's the case, but that seems pretty logical. And then you have this question, again, Anna, of what it would mean if he did that in exchange for what? And that is at the crux of all of this, that simply we just don't know at this point, and we may not know for a very long time.
Melanie, you talked about Schumer's action in the Senate. There's also movement on the House side. Maxwell's legal team responded to a subpoena with some pretty lofty demands. Where do things stand this morning?
Well, her testimony is not locked down quite yet, but those negotiations are fully underway. Her attorney sent a letter to Chairman Comer yesterday saying that initially they were planning to evoke her Fifth Amendment right, but now she is considering testifying. However, she laid out a very lengthy list of demands and conditions in order to testify, including she wants to be granted congressional immunity, she wants the questions in advance, she wants to testify outside of prison, and she wants the testimony postponed until her appeals are litigated. However, the committee already responded and said they are not going to grant congressional immunity. They didn't speak to some of those other conditions. But there has been some concern among even Republicans about her credibility as a witness, what her motives are. That being said, there's immense pressure on Republicans right now to throw some sort of meat to the base right now as they are pushing for the release of the Epstein files. That is something that Speaker Mike Johnson has not wanted to do or greenlight a bill fully releasing those files. Instead, they are hoping things like securing her testimony here on Capitol Hill will be enough of a release valve for that growing pressure.
Catherine, do you think Maxwell has any incentive to play ball with the House? And what do you make of her requests?
No, well, only one of her requests is reasonable. Clearly, she has an open appeal. She should not be forced to incriminate herself. She should ask for immunity from prosecution for things she said. Everything else is just outlandish. Why should she be given the questions beforehand so she can tailor her testimony to what they want to hear, meaning the Republicans, or what she wants the people to think is true, which may not be true at all?
Ryan, another move by the administration to project transparency on this case that has only raised more questions is that prison surveillance video that they released earlier this month from the night Epstein died. It had this time gap. And that's back in focus this morning. What are we learning?
Yeah, everything, obviously that the administration has been saying about this has been heavily dissected. And that missing minute, there's also been reporting that the video was sped up a little bit, goes a little bit quicker, that it was edited. Wired had a piece about it being pieces of it, the video itself, being edited and pieced together. I think one important piece of context to wrap around all this is just the state of tech within the federal government and how a lot of this can really be really locked up in some sort of old technology, and that's one thing that you have to keep in mind with a lot of this. But certainly, this so-called missing minute that they've explained was sort of this regular thing that occurred around this time at the bottom of the hour on a regular basis is certainly not helping shut down any conspiracy theories about Jeffrey Epstein's death.
Yeah, it was the Attorney General who said that there's like a video reset. And that was why there was a time gap, and that should be consistent with other videos, is what she had said. But now, obviously, there are new questions if, in fact, that missing minute actually isn't missing on another version of the tape. Ryan, there's also been so much focus on, of course, releasing the case files, but also those grand jury transcripts. And on the latter, the DOJ has submitted a new filing asking a court here in New York to unseal those transcripts. Similar argument made to the one that was rejected by a judge in Florida. Will we see the same outcome here?
It remains to be seen. I mean, there was a circuit court opinion that sort of dictated how that case had to be handled in Florida. But this is definitely an uphill battle in this New York case as well, just because it's so unusual. What the Justice Department is arguing is that there is such high public interest in this case that it should warrant this unusual release of grand jury transcripts. But we don't ultimately know what the outcome of that is going to be, or whether that's going to satisfy a lot of it. Remember, those grand jury transcripts are primarily going to be focused on going after the actual target of the investigation. So this notion that there's going to be a lot of other names in there just probably is not true, because when you go before a grand jury, you're presenting that case to indict the person who you're targeting there. So you're not really bringing in a bunch of random names from the side. So I think that, if that ultimately is released, it's not necessarily going to be this huge new revelation that some people might think it would be, Anna.